Back last video, we actually worked on our gorilla, and this video we're going to load our gorilla. So in case you're not aware, we are making Grumpy Gorilla, which is a game about collecting lots of items, having halal snack packs with an island that a gorilla that has serious bowel issues. So today we're actually going to be loading in the gorilla sprite itself, and as you can see there was a little bit of extra code there, but that's okay. We're not going to be using that. We're just going, today we're going to be using some base classes, which I've already predefined here, only because I'm not a game developer by trade. I'm just using stuff from an older game that I worked on after doing all the learning, and we're going to add the gorilla to the game. So as you can see here, we've got sprite.cs. This is actually the file that I use to load most of the sprites in my game. It's something I wrote years ago. You see it in here, sprite.cs. If we drag and we drop that into Visual Studio, it will load it. But however, we don't want that. We want it to be actually added to the folder of the project. So we're going to add an existing item, which is a C# class. And where's it from? It's from Even Funner Game. Properties. Jeepers. We're going to copy that directory. Going to go in. There we go. Sprite.cs. So sprite.cs, first thing we're going to need to do is change the namespace, otherwise it won't be in. So I think it's Grumpy Gorilla, so it's going to be taken into account into the project. And so sprite is basically a class that I use to define all the drawing logic and all the stuff like that. So now that we get back into it, we're going to define Grumpy Gorilla as a new sprite. Things we need to put first are a texture 2D. In fact, I'm going to put this side by side just so we can see what I'm actually doing. We're going to get a texture 2D, which is it's basically an object it's a class included with Monogame by default to load 2D textures, because Monogame does work with 3D, but we're not doing it at the moment. Texture 2D Gorilla, actually a sprite. We will clean this up later, I'm just showing you how it all works. And then, now we're going to also add a sprite. Actually no, we shouldn't call that, we should call it Gorilla Texture. And then sprite gorilla, or actually a sprite underscore gorilla. So we're using our load content method over here. We're going to first load in the texture. So we're going to gorilla texture equals content dot load texture 2D. We're going to get the asset name, which I think in this case, and don't hold me to this because I'm not the greatest at this stuff. I know we're going to go into character. Here we are, car underscore Jared.png. So I think you don't need to take it into account, but just in case, I will show you what's part of Monogame. Keep in mind, this isn't a tutorial, so if I do ramble along, it's just a case of me collecting my thoughts and thinking about all these terrible things that I'm doing by making this. Looking at content, we don't want that. We want to go add existing item, get out of Even Funner Game. I'm going to go Visual Studio 15 projects, and then Grumpy Gorilla content sprite underscore Greg underscore OG. Copy the link to the directory. Here we are. And so I think all we need to do now is just put in the file name for this, which is that. So everything loads from the content folder as far as I'm aware. So we've got gorilla underscore texture, that's the first part. That's the first requirement in this. Second part, we're going to load the gorilla itself, so we're going to go sprite underscore gorilla equals new sprite. Now, first part is the gorilla texture, so we're going to go gorilla underscore texture. The amount of frames is 1, the amount of levels is 1. We're going to load it on 1010 just as a test. That's pretty simple. Now, as part of all this, it will actually load in the required things. Next part is we need to run the update method. Now, update is run here. It's run every frame of the game. We can actually just run this by going sprite underscore gorilla dot update. Pretty simple. No requirements. It takes everything that was already in there. And then as part, we need to also do draw. Now, the draw method requires what's called a sprite batch, as defined here by Monogame. Sprite batch pretty much takes care of all the drawing mechanics in the game. So we go sprite underscore gorilla, goodness gracious me, sprite batch. There we are. So that actually that's all the drawing, and hopefully, don't hold me to this, it'll probably mess up. yeah, it's going to mess up because by now it should have loaded. Could not load sprite as a non-content file. That's interesting. Interesting. Gorilla underscore Greg.og. Now, this is where a lot of the debugging comes in, so I'll quickly pause. Well, Christ on a cracker, that was bad. Basically, when I edited the monogame pipeline, I didn't properly open it and save it. So remember that for future kids, that the monogame pipeline is a bit of a work in progress thing, but after editing it properly and taking into account that not only does your content have to be in the working directory, it also has to be in the output directory. So we see here I've copied the Greg into here, but as soon as you run start, we see him. There he is. That's our boy, Greg the Gorilla. So what we can do now is we can actually sort of start working on modularizing the whole game. So the best way to do this would be to create an entirely new class for Greg the Gorilla himself, and we can call it something along the lines of character. So new item, I'm going to call it character, and this will be our character class. So we can actually say Greg details. There we are. So isn't that great? Now, best thing to do would be to make sure that we import the right things for the XNA framework. So going back to our character class, we can see that's probably the best thing. And any good C# program will tell you that with the object-oriented side of it, we just need to import sprite. Now, probably thinking what's going on here. Generate constructor? Well, fucking shit, eh? Well, we need to generate the constructor, and here we are. So, after doing that, we now know that when this character is created, it asks for the exact same things as the other. And so, the way we can call stuff like that is just by going using that. Now, we also need to define, we can actually go this dot sprite. Here we have all this. This is our stuff. So public character will load everything in. Now, next part, we need to add a public update. We can do that like that. We can go this dot update. So inherited type, potential fixes. Yeah, we can do that, eh? We can go update character, just to avoid using the wrong things. What's it going on here? Method must have a return type. That's because we forgot to set it as a void. So we've got character, update character, and we also have public void draw character. So all these, we need to inherit a sprite batch. Well, I think it's lowercase b. Is it? No, what is it? That's the joy of it. I think it is. Yeah, it should be camel cased. That was weird why it wasn't showing up before. And we'll go sprite batch. Like that. So what this is doing is it's expanding upon our already existing things that we have defined in Sprite, all our existing methods, except we're going to be doing a few things in between. So as we can see, I have actually defined in here somewhere, we have float x and float y, which actually sets the vector of our location. Now a vector in video games and well, pretty much anything, mathematics and such, a vector is an x and y coordinate, so that's really good for setting where our character is. And so we actually can make our little character move. However, we will first define a few things. So instead of defining in game1.cs our texture on a global scale, which isn't the smartest thing, we're actually going to define it within its objects. We're going to go private static gorilla underscore texture, which we can actually just set there content dot load texture 2D. That's right. Actually, no, we can't do that there. This is another thing we'll also need to do is we'll need to actually inherit one more thing, and that will be our content. So we're just going to go private static gorilla texture like that. What's going on here? Private. Well, actually, that's interesting, isn't it? Public character texture 2D frames. Sorry, I've had a bit of a mental blank. Going into our character, float X, float Y, load. Oh, there's my problem. In the original thing, no, we better not directly reference sprite because that means that we will be tied down to using this. Instead of expanding upon our forget everything I just said then, eh? We're going to actually create a we're going to make a public sprite, and we're going to call it sprite. There we are. So that's going to be the actual sprite. So instead of directly expanding upon the object, we're just going to use this as a container for the object. We can get rid of that. Now, so that's there, and I know it's probably not the greatest object-oriented programming, but I do kind of prefer that there. We can actually make this load character. Actually, no, not even that. We'll just make a character like we did last time. And we can get away with a few things now because we don't actually need to load half of this. To make it easier for referencing, we might even just give it the X and Y coordinates. So, sprite equals new sprite. See, so we're going to get our texture 2D and such. While we're at it, we will go private texture 2D equals gorilla underscore texture, like we have set here. Which also means we can get rid of that in the future, but we're going to go gorilla. One thing we are missing is defining the content. So content in this is known, I think it's just, no, what have we called it? Peek the definition of it. It's a content manager. So we're going to define a content manager to inherit. Doesn't seem to want to call it framework content. There we are. Content. And so now we can actually do gorilla texture equals content dot load. We get it like last time. Texture 2D. We're going to go sprite underscore Greg underscore OG dot PNG. Now, isn't that exciting? So that's actually going to load up the texture instantly in there, and so we can now go into our gorilla texture thing. We also need to define the frames, which is 1. Going to define the levels, which is 1. Going to define the float X, which is going to be, we'll name this pos X and pos Y, so we don't get confused. It will inherit pos X. It will inherit pos underscore Y, like that. So we have a sprite, and that's what's going to happen whenever we load our character. Now, to call the updating of the character here, you can go sprite dot update, and then in our draw character we can go sprite dot draw, and we're going into inherit the sprite badge. There, so that's our character class. That's actually expanding upon the pre-existing sprite class, not directly. So as you can see, we're using this as sort of a container. So we give it a description. We can do a container for the monkey man. This is cool. Now, how are we going to use it in here? Well, we're going to change this to character. I'm going to call it sprite gorilla still. Actually, no, we won't. We'll call it gorilla because that makes it a bit easier. Because it's not a sprite, it's a character. Now we go gorilla. We don't need to do that. We can actually go gorilla equals new gorilla. So it equals new character, and we're going to define our content manager, which will go as this dot content. Our pos X, which will be 10 again. Our pos Y, which will be 10 again. We can go gorilla dot update character. Keep in mind that all this extension and such is being taken care of by Visual Studio. We're going to go sprite. Oh no, we're going to go draw character. So there we are, reloading the game by pressing F5. Should now still give us the same thing, but it's an extended gorilla. Last thing that we might do before I end this video is actually make him move. So we can do this through the update character method. That's why we're using a separate thing. So instead of directly editing the sprite, we're keeping it in a nice object or a class as character. Now, update character, how are we going to make this work? Well, we're going to use the vector set by sprite. So when I created the sprite class, we have here location. So we're just going to make him move. We'll take in keyboard input next on the next episode. Ooh, that sounds fun. We're going to go sprite.location because we set it as a public vector 2. and then we're going to go dot x, which is the x thing. I'm going to go plus it. I'm going to go plus equals 0.3. What that's going to do is every frame it's going to increase it by 0.3. Now why is that? Cannot convert to double to float. We'll go new. Actually no, I think we can just go and explicitly set the type as double. Did that not work? Cannot implicit. Oh no, we need to set the type as float. There are a difference between doubles and floats for anyone who doesn't do any computer science. A float is actually not a completely accurate number, it's more of an estimate. A double is a decimal, but vectors use floats. So by adding the float before them, we override it and say that that's a float. Pressing F5, going to notice our monkey moves. This is how the movement will work in the game. So the idea is that we're going to check for the input, and then we're going to increase this otherwise, but that will be for next episode. Thanks for watching.